Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Gowing. Those of you who were here yesterday will know that I moderated the opening session with the Prime Minister. I'm sorry I don't speak your language, but you can, as before, use your headset, and if you haven't got one, please make sure you have one. We're going to be using a mixture of languages on the platform. One of the panelists did say he might use Chinese, but I think that's been sidelined for the moment. This is really continuing the theme that we were pushing on yesterday, but really didn't have as much discussion as we needed yesterday about the investment climate and global competition for funds. So we're drilling down with the panelists today about the challenges now in the investment area where Ukraine sits. And the bigger challenges in ways that we identified yesterday, but we need to drill into with the kind of experience that there is up here on the panel. I just remind you, for those who weren't here yesterday, but it's important, it's a very clear benchmark, what was said by the World Bank since the meeting in Bali last week. It's now a more challenging global environment for emerging markets, and what the IMF said as well, that there are now alarm bells ringing, their words, about Ukraine's ability to meet IMF conditionality. All this in a much more febrile investment environment. That's my description. The panelists will have clearer descriptions as well. Now, yesterday I didn't take any comments from the floor. It's going to be different this morning. We've got an hour and 20 minutes. And I'm going to give you a challenge at this point. I'm going to introduce the panelists, or get them to introduce themselves, but we have two microphones. And I'd like you to help me with any points that you want to make right at the beginning, not at the end, but right at the beginning, about what you see as major questions about the investment climate and global competition. That's not about speeches. It's just hearing your view, your concerns, which you'd like addressed. You may have better questions than me, which is great. So there are two microphones here, and I'll be coming to you in about 6 minutes to ask you, even if there's only one of you, to say, look, that's what's on my mind as an investor, as an innovator, or as someone who wants to know what is the potential, whether it be from the EIB, whether it be from the banks, whether it be from the EBRD. Help me set the agenda for the next hour and 20 minutes. So that's the spirit in which we're going to be doing this morning. Let me ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Many of you will know them, but for all of you in the room, it's important that they get their bio right rather than just relying on me. Andrei Gorshkov.
Morning. My name is Andrei Gorokhov. I'm heading investment company, local investment company. We have a portfolio of around 500 mil. We invest in mining, in waste management, and various industrial technologies. Portfolio is growing, and let's have a nice discussion. You're next.
Vladimir.
Very good morning to all of you. My name is Volodymyr Lovrenchuk, and I am CEO of Raiffeisen Bank Haval. The bank is known as the biggest international bank in Ukraine, the biggest Austrian investment in Ukraine, and we have pleasure to serve 2.5 million clients all over the country. How can I contribute to the discussion? I'm thinking mostly about our clients' behaviors and clients' appetite for investments, and that's probably why I look forward to share our experience at the operating bank in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Dominique.
Hello, everyone. I first came to the Soviet Union 45 years ago. So I spent 28 years in the region, including 14 in Ukraine, and I'm a member of the board of Ukrosi Bank, BNP Paribas, where we have also EBRD as an investor. And so as such, I not only being a member of the board, I'm also covering most of the other ex-socialist republics.
Peter.
Good morning, everybody. Peter Latos. I'm head of advisory at KPMG in Ukraine. I've been here since October of last year. So my role is advising clients on their mergers and acquisitions, consulting, and risk consulting aspects of their business in Ukraine. And I spent about 15 or more years advising clients on mergers and acquisitions around the world.
And you're going to spend more time here?
Yes, I'm based here permanently, yes.
Okay, Vasil.
So my name is Vasil Hudak. I'm Vice President of the European Investment Bank. European Investment Bank is the Bank of the European Union, so our shareholders are 28 member states of the European Union, 28 until March next year.
We assume.
We'll see after Brexit. We are quite a large investor in Ukraine. Since 2007, we have developed a portfolio of almost 6 billion euro and support both public and private sector, primarily public. I'm partly Ukrainian, my father is Ruthenian, so happy to be here.
Francis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Francis Malige. I'm based here in Kiev, the managing director for the European Bank and Reconstruction and Development Operations in a region that includes Ukraine, but also interesting places like Moldova, Belarus, and the 3 countries in the Caucasus. We are the largest investor in Ukraine, more than 12 billion invested since we were created. We're the same age as Ukraine. We were created in 1991. We have on this panel 2 banks with whom we are shareholders and 1 which is a shareholder with us. So I think we are very well connected in this panel.
Thank you, Say again. You better use the microphone so everyone can hear you. 1 family, I think you said. I'm going to come to you all in a moment, and I'm going to ask particularly Francis and others to set the tone in a moment. But I think it's worth mentioning, here we have on the front page of the FT 2 days ago, BlackRock, of all people or organizations, investors' anxiety as inflows plunge to 2-year low. And that's the kind of context, even though other banks are not saying the same thing, but that's the kind of context in which we're having this discussion. Now, I would like to come to anyone. Does anyone want to come in at the moment saying, this is the question I really want answered? Because what we want to do in the next hour and 15 minutes is work out how to match requirements of investors to projects or projects to investors. Why is there still a lack of investors, even though Peter reminded me that there's been a 30% increase in the last year, but from a low base? Investors saying there are not such good projects here in Ukraine, partly because there are poor business plans quite often. The basics of how you get investors interested, the mechanics of it, and the common errors that Ukrainian business is making when trying to involve foreign investors. And the issue of affordable financing as well, given the kind of interest rates we've been seeing, particularly here. Does anyone want to come in at this stage and say, that's my burning question? Or are you all going to remain passive? I give you that invitation. I'm going to keep offering it to you. Don't think that it's just at the end of the session. We have 2 microphones, so please feel you can come in. Now, Francis, can I just ask you for your assessment of investment? Given that you work for the EBRD, but there are 5, as we stated in a recent document from the EBRD, there are 5 very clear ambitions that you've set for Ukraine.
So we've actually just published, it's on our website, so it's easy to find, a new country strategy for Ukraine. We do country strategies every 5 years, so no inspiration from the Gosplan, but it's a 5-year strategy with 5 priorities. It's actually, for us, returning to normal. And I'd like to insist with that because...
What do you mean by that?
Well, the previous country strategy in Ukraine was supposed to expire in 2014, and we actually let it expire without replacing it because of the crisis that came after the Maidan. And so we moved into what's called a crisis response mode, which means that we had different ways of working. We didn't essentially spend the time coming up with an elaborate strategy. We said it's time to fix things. Our clients do not need strategies at the time. They needed short-term working capital finance. And if you don't have short-term working capital finance, there's no point in having a strategy because you're going to be dead before you can have your strategy. So we worked on the restructuring of the energy sector. We worked on the restructuring of the banking sector. The banking sector 4 years ago was a basket case of pocket banks. This is largely gone now. This is essentially gone. And so we decided last year that it was time to go back to normal. And Ukraine is, I think, to a large extent back to normal, notwithstanding what the good folks at BlackRock are saying. I think if you see flows of capital going out, this is not long-term capital that's going out. I think this is the hot money that is is financing a number of emerging market economies. I don't deny that this is a problem for the funding equation in some of these countries for the large corporates and for the sovereigns. But what we're interested in and what we're focusing on is the long-term investment. And Ukraine suffers from a lack of long-term investment, and there's a very, very strong link between prosperity, meaning GDP per capita, meaning people wanting to stay in this country, by the way, and productivity. There's no GDP growth if there's no productivity growth. There's no productivity growth if there's no investment. And there's no investment if there's no welcoming investment climate. And so to some extent you actually have a very, very direct link, like a chain with a few links, between the fight against corruption and the prosperity of the Ukrainian people. And that's what matters to us rather than the flows of capital coming in and out on a short-term basis. And that's where our 5 strategies are geared towards. We want to work on the competitiveness of the economy. We know that there's still a lot of assets that are state-owned and that are not performing as they should, either as an asset or for the good of the Ukrainian people. You know, there's and unfortunately, actually, a lot of these state-owned enterprises are run by private interests that didn't pay the price for them. You have issues with competitiveness in agriculture, which we want to invest in. You have issues with the integration of Ukraine with the neighboring countries. Yes, there's been a free trade agreement with the EU, but an agreement is just a possibility. You then need to find the ways to export your products into the EU markets. And to do that, for most cases, you actually need good roads and railroads, for
Let's
example.
keep on investment for the moment.
Yes.
Can I just, and before I go to Vasil for the EIB view, but when you look at those 5 points, there's an explicit kind of alert and concern here about there's got to be increased competitiveness, there's got to be good governance, there's got to be proper public governance, in your words. Making the financial sector more resilient,
Yes.
Promoting the rule of law, fair competition and support for companies that use best practice. Those are fundamental, they are profound elements of good investment. And by saying that much of that is an ambition, suggests it's still a problem.
Well, it suggests that there's room to improve, yes. You know, there's clearly anybody who's tried to drive between Odessa and Mykolaiv realizes that interconnection starts with roads you can pass without breaking your back. You know, and so anybody who's trying to export grain in a high season finds that actually, you know, wagons are a rare commodity. And so, yes, investment is needed in infrastructure, investment is needed in good governance. You do have situations where people are, at the end of the day, it's individual decisions. Entrepreneurs, one after the other, are turning the corner when they realize that behaving in a modern way without paying bribes, without cutting corners, is gaining them profits, loyalty from their employees, market share, ability to access finance, and so on and so forth. And in any emerging country, you start from a situation where it does not matter to do these things, to a situation where everyone understands that it matters to do these things. And in Ukraine, we're somewhere along the way. And so the job is not done, but that doesn't mean that the country doesn't progress.
Thank you. Vasil, your view from the EIB about the investment climate here.
Well, I think we have to take a kind of balanced view. Those who were yesterday at the start of this conference, there was the video about the situation in Ukraine, very, I would say, optimistic and positive video, but it had some very important
would you say
messages.
ambitious? Ambitious.
And ambitious as well, which is I think good. I mean, we need to be ambitious. It's part of the competitiveness element. But I think it showed that Ukraine is growing, that there is a positive momentum on the business side, and that there are good things developing. Now the question is, of course, is the full potential of Ukraine utilized? And I think the question is not. Why it is so? There are different reasons. What we see now growing is unfortunately an increased influence and intervention, I would say, of the politics into economy. This is very much due to the upcoming elections next year. It will be an important year for Ukraine and for Europe as a whole. I met this morning with the CEO of Ukrenergo, and you may have seen that the basically process which was agreed as part of the corporatization process of Ukrenergo, unbundling, etc., is basically being reversed. So it's just one example how these things can happen. Now, in terms of the capital, availability of capital, emerging markets, etc., I think that we still have enough global capital flowing around. It's the question of what conditions a country can create to attract such capital. In case of EIB, just take one fact into account, which is the fact that we have around 3 billion euro of signed contracts with different Ukrainian entities, mostly public entities, ministries, government, which is not being utilized. So basically 3 billion euro, which is sitting somewhere on the accounts, but not being translated into real projects in the economy. And I believe this is the situation also with many other IFIs. So there is money available. We need projects. We need public sector should be able to quickly move on the implementation of these projects.
But let me push you. What's the challenge? What's the challenge out there, Vasil? If there's 3 billion available, why isn't it being taken up?
Good question. We had a discussion about this yesterday with the Prime Minister, with Volodymyr Hrojsman. And I mean, it's partly on our side as well. I think the international community has to admit that we have sometimes such rigorous and conservative requirements in terms of the procedures, legal aspects, etc., that we don't move ourselves quickly enough. But I would say 2/3 of the guild is on the Ukrainian side, and reasons are different. One is the very long procedure of administrative approvals. So basically, you need to talk to the Vedomstva, you need to talk to the relevant sectoral ministries, agree with them, then it goes to Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance has to bring it to the government, then it has to go to Parliament, then to President for the approvals. It's a very long process where you can kind of stop this and slow down the process at different levels. So this is the administrative procedure, which is very cumbersome. Not enough incentives on the side of state bureaucrats. I mean, why would somebody in the Ministry of I don't know, Infrastructure worry about some projects which are financed, let's say, by EIB somewhere in Mykolaiv if you know, I get paid $150, $200 per month, and so what's that for me? And I think this is an important issue that what I see here, and what was also clearly seen yesterday in the presentation, is that the business side, the private sector in Ukraine is growing, is becoming very dynamic, innovative, driving force for Ukraine and for its economy. But I think the public sector is still very stagnant. And I think until we restructure the private sector, make it much more agile, or at least interested in the interests of Ukraine itself, we will not be able to move forward.
You're both lucky you don't have to stand for election, and therefore you can talk very openly about the realities. And this could happen in many countries, including the country where I come from, and including where you come from, in Slovakia. There's always the political pressure at the moment. So it's not unique to Ukraine. But to put it bluntly, how much do you fear that the necessities of what need to be done for creating an investment climate are going to be held back by the electoral campaign, Francis?
Let me give you an example from another country that I'm in charge of, Armenia. Okay, there's been a change in political power in April, and the Prime Minister has launched into a campaign to fight corruption. But he's actually put people in jail. Law enforcement has gone and raided the offices of the most powerful person in the country. And there was an election for the municipality of Yerevan last month. His party got 81% of the vote. He's now standing for election in front of his compatriots for parliamentary elections. Let's see.
So but what's your view?
My view is that if you're actually fighting corruption, it wins votes.
Vasil? Not just corruption, but the importance of democracy, but it can actually hold back the economic potential.
Well, I think one thing was mentioned yesterday, which was very good, which was the statement that unless domestic Ukrainian investors start investing heavily in Ukraine itself, you cannot count on big inflow of foreign investment. And when you look at the countries around, from Poland down to Slovakia, Hungary, and the new EU member states, you would see that the economic growth actually is driven by domestic consumption and domestic investment.
So that's the challenge for them?
That's the challenge for the Ukrainians. I mean, you have to, if you don't invest into your own country, you cannot expect outsiders to invest into the country itself. And I think that that's why the conditions have to be created so that local investors, Ukrainians, feel comfortable investing in their own country.
That's quite a challenge. Okay, does anyone want to come in? I'm going to open it up to others now on the panel, but I wanted to hear from the two international institutions here about their assessment. And there's a very clear challenge. You've got to invest. Anyone want to come in just to contribute to what we should be talking about? I'll keep coming to you. So, and attract the attention of one of the ladies with the microphone if you want to speak while we're on the platform. So let's open this up. Yes, indeed. I mean, do you recognize what we're talking about?
Well, since I represent a local investor, I would say that we need like small thing as capital, right? And in order to continue our conversation, I think I prefer to get where we started from quoting of BlackRock from Financial Times, right? With which you started, Nick. And there are a couple of issues. First, we've got to understand that BlackRock is the biggest asset manager, managing trillions of dollars, having thousands of investors, including pension funds, which are very conservative. And there is a global context also. There is uncertainty globally in terms of what would be happening in the nearest future. For example, Morgan Stanley is predicting that there would be some sort of macroeconomic global correction in year 2020. And when there is uncertainty and globally investors worry, definitely they de-risk. And that is why emerging market index decreased 20% compared to year 2017. And there is some worry. And that is why there is a lack of capital for emerging markets. And Ukraine is one of them. And just keep in mind that, unfortunately for now, we are 81st in global competitiveness index. And unfortunately for now, we're 76 in easiness of doing business. And unfortunately, we lag behind Eastern European countries. So there is a competition. And for now, we lose that competition. But reforms are there, and there is progress. And Francis clearly said that. And yes, we're slow in that, but still, that's our pace. And there is a fact that within 4 years, we've done more than in previous 20. So
but let me pick up on what Vasil said in particular. You know, it's up to Ukraine to invest. Don't just rely on the foreigners and the foreign investment. You run an investment company, UNG.
Right, but
is that doable?
Right, but when you do three types of projects like greenfield, brownfield, or pure private equity M&A, you need either co-investment and equity from the side of other investors, or you need debt, right? In order to get that, for example, many companies in Ukraine go to EBRD, and Francis, I think, mentioned 12 billion, right, number. And that's the biggest investor and the biggest help in terms of money and expertise, and also political facilitation and some sort of protection in terms of risk which exists.
But EIB says there's 3 billion on the account, but it's not being used at the moment.
Yeah, and they're looking for good projects, and that's one of the issues, because in order to comply with their demands, you've got to do a lot of things, and it takes around 1 year, I believe, or more, to get finance.
But that should be no surprise. No one's going to just hand out money.
Sure, that's why you've got to be patient and working on getting capital in the way needed, either from EBRD, IFC, or OPIC, or other investors coming to a market. And we see, for example, green energy sphere, where 2.7 billion have been invested since 2012, and more billions are coming actually to market, because a state has created proper incentives for investors to come. EBRD and the other international organizations supported that trend because they realized importance of being independent in terms of energy. And where there is a turmoil worldwide, there is a question in terms of emerging markets, and still billions are coming, right?
All right. Now, Peter, you make your money out of giving advice. What advice are you giving?
Well, I mean, I just want to agree with what Andre said. You know, the country has come a long way in 4 years in terms of reforms. You know, M&A activity, which is just one investment instrument, clearly, but M&A activity is up by over 30% this year in terms of value of investments in the first 9 months of the year. The number of deals is up by 60%, and that's fundamentally being driven...
But from a low base?
From a low base, absolutely. But it's being driven by the domestic market. So there is investment by Ukrainians in Ukraine, and also by internationals. You know, international M&A in the country's inbound investment is also up by over 30%, and the number of deals up by about 70. So, you know, we continue to see international investors coming. I mean, Andre's absolutely right. Renewables is one of the key areas where they're coming to invest, and also in agriculture. But as Francis said, there's need for investment in the infrastructure to really free up the routes to market for agricultural products as well.
But let's be pragmatic. When we hear from the EIB 3 billion available in euros, and we also hear the problem about bad business plans and not understanding what's really needed, what advice do you give? What kind of quality of applications do you see, or submissions?
Well, this is the challenge. So clearly where some of the money is going into, the businesses have historically operated, particularly SMEs, in a less transparent manner, let's put it that way, which is just not going to be acceptable for securing funding from either EBRD
Do they
or
understand how they have to change?
Well, this is part of the challenge, is we need to help our clients and the businesses to understand how to change, yes.
They know they've got to.
They understand if they want the investment, they need to. The question is about timing. You know, cash in the hand today is clearly more important to some than the prospects of earning tomorrow. But equally, on the other side of that, we need to help the international community to understand this is the reality of business in the country.
Dominique, what are you seeing in terms of the change of culture to make sure that investors can be attracted? I mean, Peter was pretty blunt there, saying that, well, he wasn't quite as blunt as maybe he could be, which is, you know, there's a serious problem of a mindset here of what the conditions are for attracting investment and what you have to do for it.
I have to be careful because my neighbor is also one of our main competitors. So,
he will understand.
And we have another shareholder here. So,
but you're among friends. You're among friends.
Don't worry. Don't worry. I think if you look, there is, and we discussed it over coffee. You have to remember Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union. This is the only part of the world that had more than 70 years of a different system. So it had to be built from scratch. That's very important. When you compare with Poland, with Slovakia, etc., the period of communism or socialism was smaller. So you could draw on the diaspora. It's also true that, you know, under the Soviet Union, everything belonged to everybody. Splitting the property is a key question. Who owns what? So we need strong foundations. You're not building a building on moving sands. So we need these strong foundations. And there are many questions still on that. We're moving on the right direction, but I cannot state today that 100% is right. We are on a long road, and we need to continue. There is something new, which you mentioned on from the article of the Financial Times, if you look. In the years 2000, after the Twin Towers destruction, all the central banks put a lot of money in the system. And therefore, if you compare to the situation like 10 years ago, where people were exuberant, people are more risk adverse today. There was a period where everybody didn't really pay attention. Everything was free. You can go to any country. You can invest in any country. And basically, it was easy to find money. After that, 10 years ago, we had Lehman Brothers. As a consequence of Lehman Brothers and as a consequence of all the various scandals or issues that affected the financial sector, we got to be a lot more compliant. Compliance, reviewing where the money is coming from, transparency is key. We are a lot more selective when we used to be, and I believe it was actually the only way. So Ukraine has to place itself in front of potential investors. Remember, we are the biggest French investor in this country. So we're not only seeing investments coming, we're also one of the key investors.
But what are you seeing on quality of applications, quality of submissions, picking up Peter's point, picking up Vasil's points as well?
Look, there is an improvement, but we're still lacking good projects.
Is it the projects or the submission?
Both. You know, very often people have learned how to make glossy business plans. I wouldn't say like, you know, this is a wonderful place, you know, so you go back 25 years ago, we would not be sitting in a place like this. So it's made to attract people, but you still need a sound business plan, which is not a piece of paper that looks nice. Behind a business plan which has been reviewed by KPMG at the end, I am signing off 1 million, 10 million, $100 million of investment. And I need to be careful. I need to be comfortable that, you know, in 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, that investment is not going to be taken. I'm not talking about financial investments. I'm not talking about short-term money coming in and out. We're talking here about real industrial projects. So you need to be comfortable with this. And at the end, this is the judgment that you have to ask yourself when you sign the contract.
Let me go to Vladimir. Do you want to add anything here, Vladimir?
Thank you very much. I have 2 comments plus as a response to previous discussion. And first one, I'd like to start with a statement that unless Ukrainians will massively invest, FDI will come very selectively. In selective areas or selective segments, what is ongoing, but that we can't expect more than ongoing, to my opinion. There is a lack of capital. And after 2 crises, 2008-9 and 2014-15 in Ukraine, the capital of Ukrainians dried up. Of millions of people, their savings dried up because of massive crisis, the deepest crisis, and then devaluation, which is on a very high rate. So there is no clear solution or easy solution where a bank could leverage on what capital, right? And then income and salary level is being increased last year by 25%, and we have see this and we see this trend very positively, but still the lack of capital is very obvious. So this is a topic which is a word, but we can't expect immediately effect aside of regulation or stimulus on taxation. Simply there is a certain shortage of money.
Vladimir, can I just be clear?
But give me a chance.
Yeah, but can I just be clear? I want to clarify something you said a moment ago,
Please.
at the beginning of your remark, about what the EIB said about it's up to Ukrainians to lead on this and set a tone. Are you saying that's correct or not?
Yeah, I would agree very much. Yeah, but I'd like to now to comment another area is the conditions for investments in Ukraine, and I have investors in Vienna, and we have well-known country risk statement that many things are not clear, and based on my experience, there are 3 main topics of investors' reservations for Ukraine. Number 1 is the predictability of regulation. In this area, I would say Ukraine is quite okay, as this, not independent of next elections, all leading politicians proclaim the EU integration as a strategy for Ukraine. So here is quite okay. Next one is what I've written here is property rights protection. And property rights protection is the issue which on the top priority. The actions are doing are in the right direction. The puzzle will create a picture, but I don't know when. But number of laws and regulation in this direction is is done, for investors is not enough. Right? This is clear. And number 3 is financial stability. And that's where I have more numbers and more comments on this. So we could say today that Ukraine, after deepest crisis, 2 crises in a row, does have certain financial stability. This certain financial stability widely discussed and widely commented based on 2019 foreign debt payments, which clearly could make influence on this stability. National Bank of Ukraine implemented high rates for money market. This price we all pay, squeezing the financing of number of industries for mid and long-term financing in local currency. And that's what we, at this stage, what we can present to investors as good conditions to start many of new projects in Ukraine.
Thank you.
If you ask me to summarize what I was saying, I would say in 3 areas, what is a critical value for investors, in all 3 there are positive developments, but in 2019 we'll have still number of issues that will prevent massive investments in Ukraine.
Thank you. Andrew, I'm going to come to you one moment. Does anyone want to come in yet with a question? We are all speaking English, but we can take questions in Ukrainian or Russian. So please, if you do want to come in or challenge or raise something else, please, let me get the microphone here. I'll come to you in one moment, if I may. I don't want long speeches. I'll come to you in one no.
Всім доброго дня. Я на українській мові.
Excuse me. One moment. Just keep the microphone for the moment. Andrei.
Yeah, I would like to make 2 points. First, on projects, and other on culture and mentality. So in terms of projects, there are a couple of examples. Let's say IT industry, which is pretty popular, developing rapidly in Ukraine, exporting more than 3 billion services, IT services worldwide. There is a venture named Grammarly. It's a software. And they recently raised $110 million in order to continue development of that software. Several years ago, we had a sale of Ukrainian venture named Luxury for $150 million to Snapchat. Then we have various examples in renewables when Ukrainian investors prepared ground, and then foreigners came and bought infrastructure and then built on that, or there was a joint venture, like 51% controlling stake to foreign investor and 49% to local one. So there are projects and there is capital coming, but specific conditions which have to be met in order for those capital to come have to be met. Otherwise, capital won't be there. In terms of culture and mentality, Ukraine is not unique in challenge in getting a proper culture and mentality in terms of investment and culture. And there are many countries worldwide which in the past got into global economy. For example, 150 years ago, Japan. Recently, I would say 20, 30 years, China. And all of them, and many other countries, Poland also, what they did, they created agents. So the first, agents and incentives. Agents, I mean people who were coming from abroad to work short and mid-term, while local guys are getting that mentality and training elsewhere, usually abroad. And Ukraine have started that process. Again, let's say, for example, IT industry. A lot of IT specialists went abroad or worked here for international ventures, and then they decided to make their own when they got proper training. So I believe everything is feasible. It's just a work, strategy, and discipline have to be there in order to get to sweet spot.
All right, let me do it.
Give me a minute, please. I'd like to protect Ukrainian mentality. In 2005, here is Ruslan Spivak, my colleague, who developed commercial mortgage product, which was a good leverage for entrepreneurs to provide them financing, long-term financing for the capital they have, and number of companies all over the country in Ukraine, not only western part, which was usually in this tradition, but all over Ukraine, was decades of thousands. So we saw a number of SME, micro companies appeared each next week in our bank, knocking the door, provide me with a commercial mortgage. And this was great to see. So I would say, I think that the issue of mentality is somehow underestimated. So in the conditions when leverage is offered, and strategy is clear. This in 2005-06 was quite clear strategy of development of the country. This was very fast implemented and developed. So in existing conditions, what I mentioned before, after two crises, two revolution and current war, clearly that's different to 2005-06. But that's not the issue of mentality.
All right, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I want to just pick up on Vladimir's point about financial stability. Let's get a reality check from the EIB and the EBRD. Given that on the 4th of October, the World Bank says investor confidence in Ukraine is held back by delays in key reforms and the IMF program. But this issue of financial stability and the real financial pressures in 2019, how much is that going to be a constraint on investors, Francis?
I think the key constraint is about the uncertainty. I think one of the fun parts of doing business in Ukraine is that I've observed that the negotiation actually starts a few moments after the last deadline has passed. And that is very specific to Ukraine, I must admit, having done business in other countries as well. And so that's what we're seeing right now. But the problem is that this is an approach that actually brings a little bit of collateral damage in the sense that, well, then there's a number of people that are going to delay their decisions because they don't know what's the future. And clearly, cooperation with the IMF is essential for the stability of the country, for the monetary stability of the country. The longer this drags on, the longer the investment decisions are going to be dragging on.
So it is a constraint.
It will be, but you know, at some point, the purpose of the IMF, I think, is to make sure that it becomes not necessary to work with the IMF. Meaning, at the end of the program, the country should be able to go on the markets, borrow money, and so on and so forth. Today it's difficult. It's difficult because other emerging countries are not in great shape either, and so the markets are difficult. And so, of course, it's a difficulty for investment. Now, this being said, you do see people coming in and wanting to invest. I'd like to say to what Vasil said about the undisbursed amounts, this is a public sector-focused problem. We do not have disbursement issues, either the EIB or us, actually, with the private sector projects. So there's a problem with this kind of 3 billion portfolio. We have a couple of billion as well that we'd like to disburse faster, but this is for public sector projects. Private sector is thriving, and people that are here, I actually suspect that some of the investors that are in this country spread the word that it's super difficult to do business here because they don't want others to come and discover that there's money to be made. We're making money in Ukraine. We have, despite the crisis and everything, and we're very happy with our investments here.
The EIB view on the financial stability issue here, when the IMF says that no funds have been received since April 2017. In other words, there's still that sense of constraint.
Yeah, Nick, before I go to this, I just want to underline what Francis mentioned, that this undisbursed money is really related to public sector projects. Projects which we have is private companies in Ukraine are actually going very well, very fast, and we see a lot of dynamism there. The public sector is the stumbling block. If we are talking about, for example, framework loans for regional development, we have 400 million framework loan, which is supposed to help to modernize public transport, waste management, etc. in regions, municipalities, and this is going very slowly, and I mean, there are different reasons which I already mentioned. But going to financial stability, obviously capital needs stability, predictability, and protection. And so if this is not available, then then the capital and investments would not move. Now we have discussion about the budget in Verkhovna Rada. It's a very important discussion because there are different elements, not only from IMF, but also from the international community, from the European Union, about the structure of the EU budget and about also political consequences of such structure, including, for example, corporatization of some of the state-owned enterprises. And, I think this stability, predictability is one of the typical Ukrainian phenomena, which is that you have the right declarations, the right statements by officials, etc., but then the reality goes a different way.
Peter.
And this is the instability, this is the unpredictability which hampers the investments.
Yes, so I completely agree that this is a public sector issue. In the private sector, we're seeing the investment flows, but we do need to get clarity from the government in terms of what is happening in the public sector. We've just seen again the privatization process has stalled once again, which is one of the clear objectives of the funding that's coming. And that is going to start to have an impact on the sentiment that international investors will have and domestic investors in terms of what's happening in the country. There needs to be clarity for investors about what the long-term objectives are.
Thank you. Right, your question, please.
Всім доброго дня, компанія «Продукт».
Good afternoon. I've got the question to all of the panel participants. So what are the acting factors for that private business which you are mentioning about? I'm the representative of the private business. So how can we make the interest rates decreased for the private banks? Because every day we face the challenges, every day we face them, and we want to be sure in the tomorrow. That's why we need funding, additional funding, I mean. Thank you.
Interest rates. Dominique. Wave your magic wand. What is going to happen on interest rates?
Look, normally there is an equation that links the interest rate to inflation. And as inflation lowers and as expectations of inflation are lowering, interest rate on average should go lower. By the way, there is something that affected interest rates in this country greatly, was the nationalization of Privat. Because before that, Privat was controlling 30% of the deposits, and they were paying a very high rate of interest on these deposits. So I think we get, at the moment, step by step, a lowering of the interest rates. This is not as rapid as we want. We would love to have lower interest rates. All of us, believe me. But in order to do so, well, we have the elections next year. We have an open question. We have an open question on where are we with the IMF. And that does not depend on me, doesn't depend on Volodymyr either. So I'm not going to propose or to tell you tomorrow is going to be beautiful, but once these two major steps are done, I really trust that the interest rate will continue to lower.
Do you believe that will happen?
I believe it will happen, but my question is not to believe or not to believe. My private faith is something different. As an investor, as a member of the board, we have to take decisions. So we accompany this. I think the interest rates we charge together with Raiffeisen, by the way, if you look at most of the foreign banks, they propose lower interest rates than other banks. I will not discriminate between the other banks, but in general, the international banks present in this country have, promote stability, and with stability, we also promote lower interest rates. Now we wait good projects. We wait people we can trust. We wait people we know where they made the money, and we go back in time. If you propose to me to open a casino, I'm sorry, it's not my business. If you propose to me to open a new factory making cheese or whatever, we can talk.
Thank you, Vladimir. I should tell you, there are a good number of people with their hands up now, so we have a lot to squeeze in.
I'll try shortly. I have a comment and I have a picture. May I ask to switch on the screen, the picture? Yeah. So that's to support what was mentioned before, these lines with money market price, interest rates, and inflation now is spreading, which is not in normal situation should be. And you see a picture, our next picture is, so it reminds me jaws of shark.
Can we change the picture, please?
Yes,
there
this picture is that. So, as is jaws positive or negative, I believe many people in this audience know that positive, negative jaws is important for the company as well as for the country. So, we have a growth of salary, of income of population, which is very good. Income is growing. Costs, inflation is now 1 digit, or 11, 12 is below the growth of salary. This money should support business. So business should grow faster. It's not happened. So for this reason, stimulus for business will give us a result in a few years probably, but we see it not immediately now. My understanding that the country should provide more services and products now. And my priority is land market to be opened, not only for this reason, but this reason is one more additional argument that money should have address to be located in Ukraine. And land market will make leverage for land mortgage and will make area for people's investments with a growing income. Thank you. And this will move pricing down. Thank you.
Andre, interest rates.
Yeah, interest rates. So first, if you expect cheap money, forget about it. Why? Because Ukraine is a part of global world, right? And their trend is different. There is increase in price of money. Look at US and IFRS there, they're increasing their rates. So if you ask me what to expect more expensive debt in the nearest future. That's first thing. Second thing, if you are asking about where you're gonna take capital from in order to develop, at a quicker pace, that's another question. You have two options as far as I understand. Actually three. The first one, take the debt which local banks provide to you, or try to find international debt, but I doubt considering the industry where you are in at the moment as a company. Second, look for co-investment. Internal or external, people love these days, investors, if you have a proper company to invest, that's a product, right? What do you produce? What's your segment? Okay, so that could be attractive if it's a good project, if you prepare a good business plan, investment thesis for investors. And the third thing, just grow organically at the pace, at the speed which you can afford right now, and wait for better times in terms of cheaper capital. That's it.
Thank you. Please, you've got the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name is Viktor Skushavsky. I'm an economist. So as for the interest rates, Ukraine will never have low interest rates, even if inflation will be zero, if we don't have rule of law and protection of the property rights, because everything will be spent, all of the interest rates will be the risk assessment and the risk size. And now two figures as for the topic we are having today. We're speaking about the investments, and these are the fresh data of the National Bank. During the 8 months of the current year, foreign direct investments into Ukraine have decreased 1.5 times in comparison with 8 months of the last year, and they are the tiny sum of $1 billion. This is the level of the end of the 90s, that is minus 20 years. Knowing that the outflow of the capital from Ukraine to the offshores, according to different assessments, is approximately $5 to $10 billion, which is, by the way, approves the sentence that unless the Ukrainian investments don't come back and don't come to Ukraine, we shouldn't wait for any foreign direct investments. And a very short question to Mr. Hudak. You've said that 3 billion euro the signed contracts were, and this money is not used. I've got the question, what about the interest, the percent? Are they paid in time?
Microphone back to the person behind. Vasil, that particular question, the interest. What rate of interest do you pay on your own money?
Well, of course, we have the advantage of lending and having the cost of funding from outside of Ukraine. So we basically fund and EIB is financed by placing our bonds, which is actually a large amount, around 70 billion euro per year in the international markets. And as a AAA institution, we have very low cost of funding, which we can transfer to the clients in Ukraine. So obviously our lending is at lower interest rate than what it is on the local market, and that's what we see as an added value of EIB in countries like Ukraine. But to the question of interest rate on those outstanding, non-utilized 3 billion euro, we actually don't charge any interest rates or any commitment fees, etc., on the money which is signed but still not utilized. So it's one of the things which we as an International Development Bank actually contribute.
Thank you.
So Ukraine is not losing any money, but it's losing in terms of opportunity of utilizing the money for its economic growth.
Francis, let me pick up on that point, particularly what you talked about governance, that interest rates are not going to come down until there's better governance in this country. Given your 5 points, is he right that until those 5 points in your new document are respected and there's clear action, it has to be accepted that high interest rates are a fact of life here?
Well, I'm not sure I would go this far. There certainly is a relation between, everything is linked in the end, right? Between the rule of law environment, the cost of doing business, and the level of interest rates, but it's not a direct relationship. I think very directly what you have, interest rates are a function of the balance of the state. The state needs to borrow. If you look at the balance sheets of the state banks today, there's much more government bonds than loans to actual clients. So the state needs money, and so therefore, you know, it's a bit like when everyone wants to buy tomatoes and there's not on the market, the price of tomatoes goes up. Okay, so you have the same with money. You know, the state needs a lot of money and it buys all of the money and there's not enough money for the others. That's called crowding out. Now, the other thing is, of course, there is an element of trust of the global markets into the macroeconomic stability of Ukraine. And I think the country has made a tremendous progress on that front. And so it's a matter of continuing with the sound policies that the central bank has.
But that's a contention, that until these issues are resolved...
I don't think it's true.
Okay.
I mean, what it is a direct, the level of interest rates that businesses have to pay is a direct function of the macroeconomic policy of the central bank and of the good budget management of the government. If you have these two things, and of course, you're going to find it easier to manage the country better if governance is better in the state sector, because the money is going to go where it needs to go instead of going to go where it does not need to go, or it should not go, okay? But, so to that extent, everything's linked. But the determining factors for the interest rates that this gentleman is paying and this gentleman is paying and we are charging to these companies is with the hands of the budget discipline of the country and the monetary policy of the country. And continuing with this and demonstrating, you know, people say there's a democracy, there's uncertainty in the elections. I say bravo. It's better that we don't know who's going to be the next president, all right? Not everybody can say the same thing, including in nearby countries, all right? So that's democracy and it's a good thing, okay? But what we need to demonstrate and what the country will show, I'm confident, within the next 6 months and more, is that whoever is the president, it doesn't transform the institution that the central bank has become that manages the finances of this country in a responsible manner.
Thank you. I think we have about 20 minutes to run. I'm going to come to you next. Does anyone else want to come in? Can we get the microphone here and a microphone here so you can see we're going to have a full 20 minutes. So calibrate your responses accordingly, please.
Thank you, Nick. My name is Sergei Yevtushenko. I represent renewables industry. Our industry is growing fast, and on a daily basis we are working with banks and loans. And I have to say that we are not very much sensitive to interest rate. We are much more sensitive to a very important banking tool, which is a project finance. Without project finance, we are very much restricted and limited to a mid-sized project like 20, 30 million euros, not more. We cannot afford ourselves to do a bigger project. Even we are a mid-sized company, we are limited to a very mid-sized projects. And I even don't mention big infrastructural projects which does not have any chance without project finance. So this is probably a question to Ukrainian bankers. When do you expect this tool would be accessible for Ukrainian companies and for international bankers? How do you feel comfortable with this tool and project finance?
Thank you.
That's an issue for Ukrainian companies.
And I'm going to come there next. Please, Dominique, Vladimir.
At the beginning of my career, I did project finance. 10 years of project finance. And I remember the conferences at the beginning of Perestroika on the question of project finance, so there's nothing new. Project finance needs a very elaborate legal system. Remember, the word credit comes from Latin. I've used it in many conferences. I'm sorry for the one who heard it. But credo, credis, credit is to trust. No trust, no credit. To make it simple. If you want something simple, which is the normal type of banking, which is based on the balance sheet and then you have a mortgage or some kind, that's normally easy. If you go in the project finance area, and I'm very, very careful, because there is a misunderstanding of what means project finance. Project finance in the world is usually a project which is minimum $100 million or $150 million. It's minimum. Otherwise, why? Well, just because the project is being repaid on the revenues you get from itself without sponsor that guarantee. The owners are not guaranteeing the project. Okay? So you left with a tool which is producing something, and that's the only source of reimbursement. This is difficult. It's done only in major economies. We are not yet at this stage. I wish we can, because then, my skills are more in demand, but we're far from it. EIB and EBRD could invest in this, but as a private banker, I would be strongly conservative.
Thank you, Dominic. Can I just check with the others? Does anyone else want to come in? Vladimir or Andrei, quickly, and then EIB and EBRD.
Experience of our bank is negative. We lost money with project finance in the previous years, and it's difficult to find new arguments that environment becomes better, that we could look for more efficient projects. The same, or almost the same experience in the group in other countries. So this now not in the priorities that banks know what to adjust and how to change to ensure the efficiency of the project and to pay money back.
Thank you. Andrea, Peter, do you want to come in?
Well, you've mentioned that you're a medium-sized company in your renewables. I think you have a challenge in getting project finance either from local banks or international banks abroad. Look for co-investment, as others do. And also look for creative ways. I heard about the project. I'm not sure how successful it will be, but people are trying to be creative. They went to Belarus, established a company there, and tried to issue a token to investors in order to collect money there and then invest in building infrastructure in solar, I believe. I'm not sure that it will, be successful, but we'll see, like within a year, how much money they are going to collect there.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to come in? And then...
Yeah, I mean, just the only thing to add is to consider the international investors who are here and increasingly coming in renewables. I mean, we are dealing with a number of international players in wind and solar projects, consistently at the moment.
And project finance?
Well, there is some project finance, but these are mainly strategic investors, so an opportunity to co-invest with a partner.
All right, Vasil and Francis, quickly on project finance.
Well, first of all, renewables is certainly in line with our priorities. We are one of the leaders of the overall fight against climate change, so this is an area where we are actively looking into also in Ukraine. Of course, with project finance, from the banker's perspective, you take risk on the project itself. which means you have to have a reliable partner, somebody who has the experience of dealing with such projects. You are committing long-term money to the project, so you have to have also trust in the regulations of the country itself. So it's a mixture of things where you have to rely on basically on the project itself and the return on the project. So overall, we ourselves, we are interested. We would have to look at the projects which are, because of the size of the bank, at the projects which are over 50, 60 million euro of the size, which is, on the other hand, not easy to find in Ukraine with very reliable partners who have experience in this field. But we are open to this.
Francis, the principal.
Well, you can come to us for that size of projects, but you can also come to us with smaller projects. We do smaller projects. We have a large team on the ground to do them. The one thing I'd like to say, though, is sustainability is very important in projects because this is long-term money. And so if you have a solar power plant, don't come to us because right now, under the current feed-in tariff structure, there is no sustainability of any solar investment, and we're going to discontinue. I mean, we're going to continue what we have in the pipeline, but we're not going to accept any new solar projects until there is a better structure for the tariffs, essentially moving to an auction system in Ukraine. Because the tariffs as they are produced, as they are today, make the entire energy market unsustainable in the next few years. And so we don't want to be helping people add more solar capacity at a time when this would only further the certain demise of the electricity market further down the line.
Right, a challenge to all the panelists. In 8 minutes, I want you to have 1 minute available and give one big takeaway for the audience on investment, the investment climate and global competition. Please at the back, and there's a gentleman here as well. And we're about 8 minutes from ending, and a lady here. So can you keep your remarks short, please?
Thank you. I will speak Ukrainian. So, my name is Volodymyr Vlasuk. I am the head of the company, of a research company which deals with the industrial development of Ukraine. And I'm one of those who believed in the renaissance of the industry of Ukraine. We had the period of industrial glory, but I would say that 18% of the rate is not a very nice indicator for the industrial renaissance of Ukraine, which makes the long-term investment for the projects totally impossible. I mean the refinancing rate. But I'd like to mention the different thing. Now we are dealing with the budget draft of Ukraine, and next year we'll have more than 11 billion of negative trade balance. And lots of money have to be spent for the external debt. Those are two factors which claim lots of dollars in Ukraine, which needs to be gained to pay those accounts. Запитання, будь ласка. So, still, Ukraine involves to cover the deficit, as for the state bonds, for the 9%, the external debt. But we have internal currency reserves, so we have the deposit rates less than 0.5%. So the question for the present is, would it be right for this period to allow the internal currency loans to cover the needs of the currency according to the state? That would be cheaper than to take money from the foreign.
Question. Who wants to come in on that? We've got two other people who want to ask questions as well. Vladimir.
Я відповім з радістю українською мовою.
I will definitely answer in Ukrainian. The question is debatable. There are several points of view, and you know that in the programs of the politicians there are certain alternatives. As far as we understand, that the high interest rates is the payment, what we have to pay for the financial stability during a very complicated financial year. I mean the next one, 2019. If the financial stability is provided when we have such debts, we have to create new business models and to research them in more details. The majority of analysts just still base on the model which exists now. Point two, whether we can involve or not the funds of the state. Well, I would say this is the very high rate. It seems to me that it is being implemented now. As far as I know, the state banks want to implement that. I will name the example of 2009, Ukraine and Poland. Ukraine had the fall, when we had the crisis, the economy had the decrease of 15%. Poland, in spite of what was going on in the world, had an increase of 3%. The main factor was the macroeconomic stability and partly financial stability. And there is a little detail. The Polish decided to have loans and crediting in the local currency. They didn't work with foreign currency deposit. It was the main factor. So if we do that, our risks could increase, and there are lots of other negative consequences, including investment consequences. I wouldn't play this game. It's too dangerous.
Else? No. 18% though seems inevitable. Please.
Hello, Alex David Bart, founder of Empire State Capital Partners. I've been trying to convince many foreign investors to come into Ukraine, and there was just the conversation about political cycle versus economic one. Just recently, we've had lots of delegations, and all the local experts, so to say, oh, you can't invest large sums before the presidential election. What are you, crazy? I want to find out your gentleman's opinion. How do we bluntly get the point across and hope that it's going to be correct that in this new paradigm in Ukraine after the Maidan revolution, that there shouldn't be a direct correlation with each political cycle, that there will be a redistribution of wealth or any other thing such as this?
That's a hard one. Does anyone have a clear view at this? Peter?
I'm not sure it's necessarily a clear view, but I mean, all we can continue to do is to educate the foreign investors. You know, there is perception of what is going on in the country, then there's the reality. You know, I mean, I can tell you now that my pipeline that I have of international clients coming to invest in the country and wanting to conduct due diligence or have M&A advice is not slowing up. You know, the elections are coming, everybody knows that, but they're still coming to us for advice. So, you know, it's part of my job, it's part of everybody's job on this panel and everybody in this room to continue to promote Ukraine as an investment destination, to do that pragmatically, but to make sure that people really understand, you know, how to invest into the country and how to do that in a way which will protect them from the risks that do exist.
Francis and Vasil, you have to make these judgments. You come from, Vasil, we were talking earlier about the country you come from. You know, there are changes happening all the time at the moment. You say democracy is great. And of course, democracy is about the people saying, that's what we believe, even if some people are shocked by what they then decide. But quickly, the principle of how countries can adapt to this, not just Ukraine.
Well, I think part of the answer is about building institutions. You don't have to have a complete upheaval of the entire organization of the country every time there's an election. Otherwise, you know what? In May next year, I'll be waiting for the next election before I invest, right? And when the next election is over, there's going to be another election. So the answer has to be, you have a strong rule of law, you have a strong central bank, you have a strong tradition of managing the public finances in the Ministry of Finance, you have a parliament that has a tradition to behave responsibly, and so on and so forth. And yes, you could say not all of these elements are combined in Ukraine at this point, but that's still what we need to do. We need to build institutions so that the democratic transition, the democratic alternance between you know, one party and the other does not need to completely upend
point one in your 5 points is proper public governance.
Yes, but that's, yeah, absolutely, but that's, we don't mean that in the sense of the governance of the state itself. We mean that in the sense of governance inside state-owned enterprises. And that's why we've been investing so heavily to have proper boards of directors in companies like Naftogaz, Ukrzaliznytsa, and so on and so forth.
Vasil, this one critical issue of the linkage to political processes.
Well, I think you have to decrease the linkage between the politics and economy and business. Nobody's worried, for example, in France or I know in UK that the new government is coming and I'm not going to invest in the country because I'm waiting for the elections. So
hang on.
You have this difference. Okay, Brexit is certainly something, but that was a decision by your people, yeah, by the citizens.
I came to KIEF and got reassurance. Wonderful.
Anyway, I think this is why you need to privatize, deregulate, you need to decentralize, basically to decrease the impact to which the politics can influence the business cycles.
There were politicians in Britain who reassured that the Brexit process would not destabilize the country. Please, last question, I'm afraid, and then we're going to go to each of the panelists.
Irina Kostyushko, company of Zoria. I have the question to Mr. Volodymyr. Volodymyr, our company dates back to 20 years when we are clients of your bank. In fact, we do like this service, but the only question, we have an agrarian company, so what do we need? If we need to take a loan, we know that we need something for that, but sometimes it's not enough to have funding for another project. So what else, what other tools can we use to take the loan? But if, unfortunately, our mortgage is not enough, Mr. Andriy wanted us to organically grow at our expense, but this growth can be very slow if we take only our financing. Thank you.
May need a private conversation afterwards, but...
Технічне запитання, але
The technical question to you, but maybe very short. The best mortgage, the best pledge is your nice business plan. If it is well proved, if it has a nice perspective, we'll definitely give you the loan without the mortgage. But you need to have financial indicators and a nice business plan. This is the basic rule of the banking sphere, and it goes without saying that mortgage or pledge is an additional tool. It's not the main one to take a decision on the loan. Thank you.
I've got to push you on this. A nice business plan. Nice is not a very technical word. Help us understand what you mean by a nice business plan.
Дякую.
Thank you for this round of applause. I'm working in the bank which belongs to the Austrian group, which is well known by its culture of methodologies and techniques, criteria of assessment, rankings. We have some of the assessments which are more than 100 of those indicators, 60 of them are quantitative, 40 are qualitative, which assess the company and its business plan. All of that can be methodologically explained and calculated. It's not that subjective. I just wanted to add 2 points. First of all, while unless you don't give the right covenants to the bank will not give you money. You understand that, we understand that, everybody understands that. But you shouldn't only grow at your own expense, because it's not an option. You want to have the rapid growth, then you can involve other investors into your company. If the shareholders agree, you will find a so-called alignment of interest, alignment of cultures and views onto the future. So there are lots of options, in fact. Well, knowing the mass interest of the technical questions, I will create an article in the newspaper to explain all of the interests and the quantity, everything what I mentioned above, because I believe in what I say.
We want you to leave with a degree of pragmatic optimism. Even if there are paradigm shifts, there are new normals, there are uncertainties in the business community, there are uncertainties in Ukraine, there are uncertainties in Europe, there are uncertainties throughout the world, there are unthinkables, unpalatables, the kind of project that I'm working on at the moment about how you think about that. So my challenge to the 6 panelists from 20 minutes ago was one big message. Let me start with Peter, and I'll end up with Francis at the end.
So my advice would be simple. If you're looking for international investment, is prepare yourself before you go and look for that investor. You know, the reason why we see deals fail is because the shareholders are not prepared to really take the steps that are needed to attract that investment. And that is about transforming the business and bringing transparency to it in most cases.
Thank you, Peter. Dominic.
Well, after Maidan, Ukraine signed a partnership agreement with the EU and signed a similar agreement with Canada. That opens huge markets. So Ukraine chose to adopt the European rules. Well, that's your chance. You've got to work on it, and you've got to adopt all the acquis. So the doors are open. It's up to you to qualify. It's a message of hope.
Andrei, 1 minute.
I would say the following. Knowing all of the hopes and expectations for the Western capital, which will definitely come to Ukraine to a certain extent, and it depends on us, you should hope for yourselves. You should count upon yourself, first of all. And when you're trying to search for capital for the development, you should understand whom you are applying for. Because without the proper understanding of the second part and its requests, you will never get the capital, and you will never get that bright future you are dreaming of. Thank you.
Vladimir.
I would make this certain conclusion in the message. That is, Ukrainian business during the last 3 years has achieved incredible points, changing the supply markets from Russia to South Africa, Latin America and Europe in different branches. We renewed the capital, and what we hear now, we need more investments, more project finance, and it witnesses that we have long-term outlook. I'm really happy of that. And point two, it seems to me that the reforms in Ukraine are going on. Mostly we are criticizing them, but we've done a lot to change the regulations. And point three, we'll overcome 2019 and we'll have more money after that. Thank you.
Let's hear from both international institutions. Vasil, first of all, I mean, you have to live with this tension in every country you're dealing with. What's your advice, assuming you might come back this time next year? What would you like to be able to say has been achieved in the next 12 months?
Well, I've been coming to Ukraine for at least the last 20 years, and frankly, if you were at similar discussions 10 years ago, you would hear the same issues related to the business environment: lack of transparency, lack of rule of law, predictability, etc., etc. So these issues are known. What we need to see is the action on the government side. When I was minister in Slovakia and we had Greece crisis, there were interest rates over 20%, but Greece had to take very tough measures. And now the interest rates are under 5 to 3%, so as in the Eurozone. So this can be done. In Slovakia, in '98, interest rates were over 20% for the businesses. And now it's 1%, 2%, 3% for the commercial deals. So this can be done, but unfortunately, you have to go through some tough measures. The government cannot behave only in a populistic way and always postpone some decisions which have to be done. I think discussion about the budget is very important. And on the business side, don't lose optimism. I think business has to go ahead. You do need to invest in the country. I think you vote by investing in the country itself, in Ukraine. And don't forget that competitiveness is about country, but it's also about the enterprise, and primarily about the enterprise. So if you invest into innovation, into your people, into your company, you will be competitive not only in Ukraine, internationally, you'll be able to grow, and we are here to help.
Francis, the EBRD view.
Well, you listed a number of things that we want to do, and I think it's a reflection that it's actually possible to do them. And there's not the same openness and the same ability to work with an IFI to transform a country in other countries where we work necessarily, not all of them. So I think the long list that you've listed in the beginning of this conversation is a testament to the number of things that the country has undertaken and is willing to consider. So my message is, one, the country is changing. Two, the change is done for and by the people of Ukraine. It's not done to please the IMF or the EBRD. And three, we're a happy investor. We're making profits, and we're looking for more people to invest in and to have a good, nice, whatever technically good business plans to show to us in agriculture, in IT, in smart infrastructure. We want to add value to the agriculture of this country. So there's remarkable talent in this country, remarkable ideas, and if I come back next year, it won't be me in the same job, but I'd like to see, one, EBRD doing more, but two, EBRD, my dream is that EBRD is not anymore the largest investor in this country, because some others have come. And we are larger, but some others have come that are even larger than us.
Thank you. We've had a very brusque and very informative dialogue. We've touched some very, very difficult issues, but what you should do from those last remarks is go away with a degree of bounce in your step, that actually there are blips, there are bumps, and that's the nature of economic and political life at the moment, but there's optimism and grounds for pragmatic optimism. So can I thank the panel? Can I thank you all, and particularly the questions and the fact that you were able to stimulate the discussion as well, and thank you for inviting me as well. Thank you.